Thanks for joining me yet again for this stroll down memory lane. If you want to support me, check out the Patreon. Patrons get extended versions of every episode as well as other fun things. My name is Ashley Clements, and these are the Look Back Diaries epilogues. 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 Have I done robot yet? Who knows? We're going to talk about recording the audiobook of The Secret Diary of Lizzie Bennet today. But before I get to that, going through old emails jogged another memory, and it's just relevant to the timeline of my understanding because I did ask you to keep a couple things in your pocket, in your mind pocket. You remember, right? Those are still in there. I actually recorded my responses to what I'm about to share with you as part of the Emmy episode because it's related to that, but they were so long that I realized it needed to be saved for another episode. And also, my reactions were very hot. I was very activated by going back into that memory. And I've never actually done this before, but I think the patrons are going to get to see those fiery reactions, and I will more calmly go over a few bullet points for the general population. That's why you should subscribe to the Patreon to see me rage. So, after the Emmys, yay, big celebration. We were all flying high, felt great. We got an email about a month later from someone who had joined the Pemberley Digital team after the Kickstarter as an administrative assistant. And that person sent us an email that said, the Academy is offering production certificates to individuals who made a special contribution to the achievement of LBD. They cost $25 per certificate. If you wish to have a certificate, we'll cover the cost. Just please know that it's an expense. That said, if you really want one, we'll get you one. That left a bad taste in a lot of mouths, and I heard from many unhappy members of the cast and crew who felt like that was just not the greatest way to talk to us about something that we should have been celebrating. And like, yeah, just get us the $25 certificate. You didn't pay us enough on the show. Why are you making us feel guilty about this small amount of money? So, on behalf of many people, I sent an email CCing Bernie to say, hey, this didn't feel good. This isn't the way to talk to your team that just helped you win an Emmy. This should just be a celebration, and don't make us feel guilty about the fact that these cost a small amount of money. And that prompted a very lengthy response from Bernie that had a lot of information in it. And I guess it's a good illustration of the lack of communication and the differing, unclear expectations around the Kickstarter, because it's an email that Bernie clearly wrote thinking it made him the good guy. And I find it like flames, flames on the side of my face, infuriating. But what is most relevant about it in terms of sort of where we are in my experience of the Kickstarter and the sort of post LBD landscape. And one of the things that I told you to tuck in your mind pocket is that this is the email when I learned I was definitely not going to get $20,000. This was when I let it go. Goodbye, imaginary money. It was nice to think I was going to get you. And that is because this email reveals some of the things that Bernie clearly felt he was completely justified in spending Kickstarter money on. He was explaining that the reason that they were letting us know that there was a $25 cost to the Emmy certificates is because that money would be coming out of what would be left over for potential second bonuses. And some of the things that the money was spent on were things that I might have said no to if I knew they were affecting a bonus. So that hotel room that they gave me at VidCon, that came out of the Kickstarter. The dinner that Bernie and Hank took us all out to when we were in Portland for LeakyCon. Like, I thought we were being treated by the co-creators of our show, and in fact, that was coming out of the Kickstarter. Some of Bernie's travel for LBD after LBD was completely wrapped and therefore not, by my definition, for LBD. Because of LBD, yes, related to LBD, yes, but not necessary for the show and not in a way that benefited any of us financially. If those appearances benefited Pemberley Digital in some way or increased viewership for the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, none of that would have translated into any financial increase for the cast and the majority of the crew of the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. So again, we're dealing with a very different understanding of this money that was, as we've already discussed, raised based on the premise of extra money is going to the cast and crew. I mean, I guess it went to some of the crew. He makes this big deal about how he's protecting the rest of the Kickstarter funds so that there will be money for bonuses, but we have very different definitions of what protecting that money would have looked like. He also completely throws Hank under the bus and basically says he just made up that $60,000 budget for the initial Kickstarter and that it was not something he consulted Bernie on and that it was completely out the window and completely irrelevant. And they did both do things that had a major impact without consulting the other. It was an interesting partnership. For the most part, it felt like Hank wasn't very hands-on with this project, but then occasionally would do something and there would be friction. Saying that any extra money raised in the Kickstarter would all go to paying the cast and crew is something that Hank did without consulting Bernie, and then Bernie was in charge of that money, so it went differently. I have seen several comments of people specifically asking who they is when I say that they did something with the Kickstarter. And part of the reason that I'm vague is because I don't 100% know. I think Hank was pretty hands off around the Kickstarter. I know that later he gave up most of his ownership of the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. So I think we're mostly talking about decisions made by Bernie. But at the time, I believe Pemberley Digital was co-owned by Bernie and Hank, and that's they, I guess. And Bernie is the one who sent this email spelling things out. So he's clearly comfortable taking responsibility for it. Someone asked, how many people are in the cast and crew? So the total of the first round of bonuses was $74,425. How many people did that go to? 28 people received bonuses, ranging somewhere between $14,000 and $200. The email acknowledges that the bonuses favored crew in the first round. And one of the things that I didn't say when I was talking about bonuses last time that I think should be articulated is that some of the crew members who received more money than many of the actors and more than some of the writers even were paid for every single day that they worked. By which I mean, if you are running the camera or if you are doing makeup for the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, you are only doing work for the Lizzie Bennet Diaries on a shoot day. We were all paid by shoot day or for the writers by script. But some of us did many, many, many unpaid days for the Lizzie Bennet Diaries that were not shoot days. All the days I showed up to help audition other actors, all the appearances that I did, all the rehearsals, we all rehearsed every single month. I had script meetings with Bernie every single month. The number of days in a month that I worked on the Lizzie Bennet Diaries was much higher than one, but we were all paid for one day a month. It just means the disparity between the bonuses is even greater than it may seem, because it's not just about how much we were paid for those shoot days, but how much unpaid work was assumed to be included. But don't worry, because he addresses the second round of bonuses. As for the formula for round two, we haven't determined what it is at this point. It'll probably be pretty arbitrary. There's an argument to adjusting it to be more cast balanced versus keeping it the same. Regardless, it's stuff for later. It's infuriating that someone who claims to be a professional writer doesn't seem to know what the word arbitrary means, because it can't possibly be the word he meant to write here. Just what, based on your whims? Like, no consideration for the amount of work people did, the amount of unpaid work people did, the people who were paid more per day from the get-go because they joined the cast later, and balancing out the people who worked earlier and made less money, balancing out scripts that were paid much less at the beginning than later. No, just arbitrary, just like, great, fantastic, good for you. Whew, I said I wasn't going to get heated. It's hard. But like, the anger, the heat that this brings up, even when I am trying very hard not to let it bother me, is why this is the point in which I just let this all go. Like, I could not carry this much fury and frustration. And so I just let go. I expected to get no money from the Kickstarter. I expected that that part was over entirely, and I expected that these people would only ever try to cheat me, and that I would cautiously go into any conversation with my eyes wide, wide open. But I just couldn't be that angry and be able to function. The email is also the first time that I learned what the budget for the Lizzie Bennet Diaries was, and I had forgotten it. But he tells us that the entire show was made for $150,000, which is not a lot of money. And yet, for the way that we made content, clearly was enough money. What's baffling to me is that we know from the bonuses that the entire cast and crew for the entire year made less than half of $150,000. And I genuinely cannot figure out where the rest of the money went, because we did not pay for locations. We did not pay for the camera. We rented lights a couple times. We didn't pay for costumes. I mean, there were a couple times that they gave Laura money for costumes, Daniel, and that's because they asked as well. They should have. The email does also clarify that the gift cards for clothing that Mary Kate, Julia, Laura, and I received came out of that $150,000. So on their budget, that would be listed as costumes. From a tax perspective, you can write off costumes more than payroll. So that may have influenced why we got gift cards instead of checks. But I don't know where the rest of the money went. Like, it doesn't cost anything to put the show on YouTube. They were mailing hard drives back and forth to Montana for a while, but once they started working with Decca, they got use of an in-house editor who, it does not seem, came out of Pemberley Digital's budget. They had to feed us, but that doesn't cost $75,000. I have produced, and I genuinely cannot figure out where the money went, because so many of the normal line item budgets that you would expect in film were not a part of the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. So, like, where did it go? Nobody knows. Somebody knows, but not me and not you. Okay. Slightly happier. Let's talk about the book. I was surprised in my email to see that I got my first copy of the cover for approval, because remember, my merch contract says I have photo approval, in December of 2013 for a book that I believe came out in May of 2014. Maybe it was June, and we just put out those episodes a little early for like pre-sales. Anyway, like 6 months ahead of time. Obviously, like, things have to happen somewhat in advance. It was kind of always assumed that I was doing the audiobook. I certainly assumed that I was doing the audiobook. And for that, I was paid by Simon and Schuster. My manager negotiated with Simon and Schuster, not involved with Pemberley Digital people at all. Audiobooks are paid per finished hour, meaning that it does not matter how long it takes you to record it. It matters how long the finished product is. Side note, if you're an audiobook fan like I am, this is why audiobook narrators speak so slowly. I have to speed up every audiobook that I listen to. I was always told to slow down, but I know that I am a fast talker. So there is also like a listening comprehension element to it, but some audiobooks are so slowly narrated, and I know that it's because they want to get the most money possible, and I can't blame them, which is why it's maybe not the best way to pay. Those are based on an old after contract, and the rate continues to go up every year. I'm trying to remember what it was at that time. I think less than $200 per finished hour. So I was used to making more like maybe $1,800, $2,000 for an audiobook, which would take like 3 to 4 days to record because you can't talk for that long straight. Your voice gets tired. You have to do it in sections because otherwise no more sound come out. In a post-pandemic world, most audiobook narrators have home studios, but this was way back in 2014 and I went to studios to do audiobooks, but I was paid a flat fee for this audiobook, meaning it did not matter how long the finished product was. And I got paid $5,000 to do that, which is by far the most I ever made on an audiobook. And, like almost as much as I made doing an entire year of the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. So that was a satisfying payday. Yeah, and I met this really lovely team. The person that they hired to direct the audiobook was clearly like throwing work to a friend who had turned his guest house into a recording studio primarily for music, and they were just like two old hippies. They were very chill and laid back, and like they were such great friends and they were so lovely and so kind. That director actually recommended me for another job later as part of the like Vine craze. I narrated an audiobook that was written by somebody else, but like co-written by Lele Pons, who was apparently like a big deal on Vine. I would not know who she was if I had not done this audiobook, but occasionally I'll see somebody write something like, why in the world did Ashley Clements narrate Lele Pons' audiobook? And I'm like, did she do something bad or is it just random? Because like, I don't know. It was a paycheck. It was the second highest I ever got paid for doing an audiobook. So I really enjoyed those guys. I enjoyed working with them, and recording the audiobook was a great experience. The only difficult part, honestly, was well, I guess two difficult parts, and both of them have to do with doing voices for other characters. One is that I knew that doing my Darcy voice was really hard on my voice. I discovered that early on in the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, but there are like long passages of being Darcy in the book, like his entire letter, much longer than I typically even had to do in the show. And I never would have picked that voice for a voice I was doing in an audiobook, but I also didn't feel like I could change it at that point. Like, we know what Lizzie's impression of Darcy sounds like. And so, yeah, I just had to like tough through it. I brought a box of throat coat tea, which is beloved by singers and actors. The owner of the house brought like a camping thermos. It really kept the heat in of hot water so that we could hang out in the guest house and I could just like keep making myself tea. And I was just drinking tea and resting. And I think we did the whole book in 3 days. And the finished product is about 10 hours. So about what, 3 hours and 20 minutes a day. But it takes, more like 5 or 6 hours to get that content because obviously you're going to take breaks. Occasionally you will make mistakes and then you go back and fix it. And the second difficulty, of course, was that I had never done an impression of some of those characters. Also, like, there's a difference between costume theater and, like, reading a diary. Like, obviously, those voices needed to sort of connect to that, but so, yeah, just figuring that out, I remember being tricky, but overall, I remember it being such a positive experience, and I think that that is because I was working with a team that was very kind to me and very appreciative of my work. They thought I was good at what I was doing, and I was well compensated for my time. And isn't that what we want out of work? To feel creatively satisfied working with people who appreciate what we bring and to be paid well for it. And I have mentioned this in some of the other look backs, but when I first read the book, some things were very surprising, and some of them were upsetting, which seems silly in a way because they directly contradicted decisions that we had made in discussions with Bernie. And it bothered me that we had been playing something other than what Kate had written. Now I think that that is silly and it works. And I think that what Kate wrote was like more feminist. I'm specifically thinking about the fact that like we had conversations about whether or not Jane and Bing were sleeping together, and the decision was no, that they were not. That's what Laura was playing and what Chris was playing and what I was playing was that they weren't having sex. But in retrospect, of course, that means that we like really are demonizing Lydia for seeming like someone who's having a lot of sex, although we have no evidence of that. So fully slut shaming that character. And then we just can't even imagine that like Jane would do that. But she's like 26 years old. But Kate didn't join the writers until right after that. And so she wasn't a part of those discussions. And I think that her retcon works really well and is good. Like, I think it's more feminist and just makes a lot more sense that Jane and Bing would be sleeping together. And of course, the pregnancy scare stuff works super, super well. Like, now I have enough detachment to say, like, that was a really good retcon. But it was like shocking to me at the time. And there were other things, but I don't remember what they are specifically anymore because I have not read this book since 2014. But I remember, I think it was at we did a promo shoot. Oh, like, I guess that's another thing I can include in this section. We did a little like promo shoot with Mary Kate and I did get paid for that. So we didn't know the final Kickstarter numbers at that point, but I did know that I was getting screwed. And that is money that would have come out of like the book funds as far as I understand, and not the Kickstarter. And I got paid something like $750 to do that photo shoot. But I was holding an ARC in those pictures, an advanced reader copy. And I remember asking Bernie, like, how's the book? Like, how did it turn out? And he said, I don't know. I haven't read it yet, which felt very obvious to me when there were things in the book that were in direct conflict with conversations we'd had and arguments we'd had. So, The Secret Diary of Lizzie Bennet, written by Kate Rorick. Like, I think I've made this clear at this point in this show. Like, based on a show co-created by, but the novelization, boop, it's not even alphabetical for his name to be first. And the summer that it came out was so fun. Like, it was very cool because this book did get like very good placement. It was in like every airport bookstore. I would pop into every bookstore and go look at my me book. And yeah, for that whole summer, it was in bookstores in my hometown and in Los Angeles. And people were sending me pictures and I was taking pictures. And it was very exciting. Our next two episodes will look at the bonus episodes that were filmed as part of the marketing for the book, probably like most of the marketing for the book because that was going directly to the target audience, the subscribers to the Lizzie Bennet channel. So we'll get back into rewatch mode, and then we've still got the final Kickstarter and some other frankly shocking revelations.